Whoa. This month on the Adventure Show we're reliving the past, all the way back to the 1930s. With the help of replica boats from the time, I'm going to recreate one of the great pioneering journeys of Scottish canoeing. For me, it's a journey into the unknown, a test of strength, endurance and commitment.
Yoo-hoo!
We're following in the wake of two exceptional people who changed the history of paddling. They were known simply as the Canoe Boys. This is their story, and ours. It's an adventure that is going to be fantastic. It's exploring parts of the country that I've never been to, but know so much about, and I've really wanted to come and see for a long time. This trip's going to be a great physical exertion, great physical challenge, but one that definitely looking forward to. On this trip I'll have some of the best days of my life.
This is absolutely stunning.
And unfortunately, some others I'd rather forget.
I've had enough.
Once I was a professional footballer with a bit of a short fuse. Now I'm a novice paddler, but I'm still not always in control. One thing's for sure, I'll need to be a quick learner, because these West Coast waters can be unforgiving.
It's not the physical being able to do it, it's the mental thing of, can I keep paddling for however long?
And I couldn't do this by myself, so I'm with one of Scotland's most experienced canoeists, Brian Wilson.
It's going to be a hard task for Michael. He's a fit and able guy, and I'm sure he's got good coordination, but getting used to any new kind of boat is not an easy thing to do. He's not a boatman, so he's got his work cut out. But I would say that getting used to one of these is not going to be any harder than getting used to a normal modern sea kayak. In fact, in many ways it's going to be a little bit easier because you don't feel trapped in it, and it's broader and more spacious. Handles very well. I think things are looking good.
And I couldn't be in a safer pair of hands. This is the man who, at the tender age of 22, kayaked 1,800 miles round the coastline of Scotland, and he lived to tell the tale.
I didn't know 22 was a young age. That's the oldest I'd ever been, and I thought this is a good time to go and do something, to explore parts of Scotland and find that it's almost like a new country, one that you don't know, and go round the corner and you're discovering stuff almost as if it's a foreign land. Well, it was all quite new to me then, and I just wanted to do more of what I had enjoyed doing and not stop at the end of a 10-day trip or a 2-week trip.
I'll need every bit of Brian's experience for the journey ahead. It's a kayaking classic. We're starting at the small village of Crinan and paddling past the islands of Ling and Seal to Oban. Then it's open water for the crossing to Mull, before heading up to Ardmore and tackling the notoriously difficult waters around Ardnamurchan Point. From there we'll be making for the small isles, where we camp the night on Eigg, and then the final stretch northeast to Mull, and a last paddle up Kyle to Skye. But don't forget, I'm no kayaker, so before we set off, a quick crash course for me in Crinan Harbour. And that's when reality sets in.
Oh,
Going a wee backwards.
I'm going to hit this boat.
Stick it in on the left-hand side.
Oh, all right.
That was nicely avoided.
Almost hit that one. Almost hit this one.
Not hit any yet. That's looking good. It's not arms. It's
like
it's all from the trunk, shoulders.
It's amazing after stopping professional sport and you do lots of different sports, you realise how so many of them, when you talk to proper people, it's the core.
Core strength
on
and balance.
Everything. Aye.
Balance, awareness.
Yeah.
Okay, look in the direction of where you want to go rather than look at the paddle.
I think he's trying to race me back in here.
I'm trying to get out of your way.
The journey we're embarking on was first undertaken over 80 years ago by two young men, Alistair Dunnett and Seamus Adam. Embracing the original spirit of adventure, they did it with virtually no money and boats that are a million miles away from the high-tech models of today.
Right.
But one thing hasn't changed. They had very little experience, and neither do I. So I can't quite believe I'm doing this, but with a little practice, I'm on the move. we're following in the paddle strokes of two young men eager to prove themselves and see their country in a new light. And that's exactly how I feel. This was almost like the symbolic start of the Canoe Boys journey, because all of a sudden it feels like you're out into the open in the wilderness.
The open sea, and for them it was their first big piece of tidal water. You know, the challenge of getting the timing right for going through the Doris Moor and everything that's to the north and the west of that. It becomes a lot more serious.
But I've got you to take care of me from now.
We'll stick together.
Glorious stuff.
Even if you come past the same piece of coast several times, each time you see it you might poke into a different corner and stop for longer and look back, and the weather changes and the tide changes, and it always seems a little bit different. You've always got that thing about seeing a headland up ahead and thinking, what's round the back of that one?
That's the thing that I'll cling on to when my arms are ready to fall off, that I'll be like, I just need to get around that headland. But we wouldn't have even got onto the water without an enormous stroke of good luck. The boats we're paddling are Loch Aber canoes, and they're highly unusual. They're not one solid construction, but come in three parts. There's only one still in existence, and by great good fortune, it's now in the Scottish Maritime Museum in Irvine. Even more remarkable is the museum's offer to build us two replica boats. So 6 months before we set off, apprentices and staff start the meticulous work of putting these boats together.
This is the middle section. We'll put it up the bench. This, we believe, was found in a barn in Devon, and it's a 1934 Loch Aber canoe. They're held together through tension. There's a wire goes from this eye bolt here up to the bow of the boat, underneath the keel, and all the way back and up to the eye bolt on the other part of the middle section. And that's tightened up with the use of bottle screws, so it puts the hull under a lot of tension, and it forces the three parts together. It's the last remaining canoe of its kind in existence, as far as we know, in the world. This one's not seaworthy anymore. The canvas is degraded, and the timbers in it are a bit defunct now, so we're going to build replicas.
We're going to take off the canvas from the sides of the boat and just the back here to expose the inside, so we can see the skeleton of the boat essentially. So we'll see the stringers, the keel, the stem post, and all the other parts that we need to get templates and measurements off of. So then we can manufacture up the parts we need for the new ones. There we go. That's one.
The opportunity that they have is to take a historic vessel, look at its construction, take it to pieces, work it up, and then recreate it, and hopefully produce something that will be similar, but in today's standards and better built than it was originally.
There weren't really plans, they just had the patent number. That's all we could find for this boat. So we're going off completely by what the actual boat looks like, so the inside of the middle section and the inside of either end.
Most boat building these days is quite modern, so they constructed a 22-foot boat recently, and that was using plywood and epoxy glue. The Loch Aber canoe is a completely new thing to them, so apart from being very historical, they're getting involved in what they regard as they're remaking history, if you like. So they had to do the forensic investigation to get inside the boat and construct it. So although there's modern methods employed, this is technology that's been surpassed.
I'll need to take the measurements from for width, length, and the depth of them all, and then if they have an angle, try and replicate the angle with a bevel. This is the template for this section here. The same size, same angle, same depth of cut in it. And then this is for the ribs at the side. This section here, so this would go like so, just fit in.
If you go to buy a canoe now, it will be blown plastic or fiberglass, carbon fibre I believe they use now. This is reasonably primitive. I wouldn't have liked to go into sea in one of these boats myself, but there you go.
After months of hard work, the canoes are nearly finished. and the apprentices have done a great job. The boats look like works of art, but we still need to do the most important test of all, to find out if they'll float. Clearly, this is a job for Brian, not me.
Hi there. Fantastic.
How do you do?
How do you do, Brian?
It's Ben and Connor, the boys that
Ben,
built the
how do
canoes,
you?
building the
Hi
canoes.
guys. That's fantastic. Fantastic. Well, I was told it would be like a floating fish box, but
Well,
it's an awful lot nicer than that, isn't it?
That's it, that's where you keep the fish. Now we've not put the deck cover on this because we don't know where you're going to sit. We want the area that you're going to sit, spray deck area, as small as we can make it.
Yes, aye. Well, that's great. And the cable runs right through
The cable runs right down, right
in a
along,
track all the way, yeah.
back up to this one.
At first we were sort of looking at the skeletons of it when it was without the canvas. We're like, is it going to look nice? Is it going to look that nice? But I was actually quite pleasantly surprised by it, because when you've got all the trimmings and all the skids and all that on it, it's just not a bad thing to look at, you know.
No, it's nice to look at. We'll try and keep it in good condition for you.
That's fine now.
Have you weighed it? Oh, great. That's not heavy. That's great. So we know what it's made of. We know what it's made based on.
Yeah.
But we don't know if it floats yet.
Yeah.
That's what today's for.
We'll see how it holds up. I think she'll float.
This is the first time we've built anything like this kind of 3-stage canoes. It's been an experience, but it should go well, hopefully. Fingers crossed anyway. This is a whole new idea for us.
Right, guys. Moment of truth.
Good luck to you.
Put the bung in down.
It will float, eh? That's lovely. It looks nice.
There we go.
Let me know when you're ready and I'll shove you out, Brian.
Ah, that's even better.
I think it's very pretty. I think it looks lovely on the water, which we didn't know how it was going to perform. We didn't know what it was going to look like on the water, but it was the performance that we were worried about.
Well, this has surprised me a lot because it doesn't look very much like a modern kayak, but it handles as good as quite a few modern kayaks. We don't have the same amount of grip and control of it, but you can adjust what you're doing by changing the seating position, which is a bit more like an open canoe. Brilliant! Love it. I want one.
Everyone at the Scottish Boat Building School has done a fantastic job, which now heaps the pressure on me and takes away my best excuses. With just a few hours of paddling under my belt, both my boat and I are going to face our first big test. Ahead of me lies something every paddler knows about, the whirlpools of the Doris Moor. My plan is simple. Ignorance is bliss.
Well, it's not a place to be underestimated, but you know, Michael's picking this up very quickly. The boats are really good. I think if we just judge the tides and the weather right, then it's not
nothing to get too.
It's nothing to worry about.
Yes, I like that. I like that confidence and belief, Brian.
It's one thing listening to Brian and his confident patter. It's quite another when you talk to the local folk.
They call it the big doors, tidal gates, and it's where currents meet. Some of the fishermen say that it can be worse than the Curragh Wrekin at times. It's a bit like a river flowing between two rocks. You can get pinnacles like mountains or hills on the seabed that cause trouble as well, and the water can flow up to that and then it has to flow around it. So all these things that you can't see contribute to these turbulent channels. If you get tide against wind, you can get into trouble.
Paddle wider on your right hand side as well. Big wide strokes on the right.
I'm looking forward to it. I'm saying that now. You know, once you get me at the other end, hopefully get me at the other end, then I might change my tune.
It's not the kind of place you want to take for granted and just assume it's going to be easy, but it is quite possible to do your predictions and work out when it's going to be handleable and when it's better avoided. Okay, so you see where all the commotion is. You'll start to feel a strong pull that way. Just in front of us is the main stream running west.
When the original Canoe Boys were here 80 odd years ago, this was the moment when adventure turned to danger. Years later, Alistair Dunnett wrote about their extraordinary journey and relived every dramatic detail of that passage through the infamous Doris Moor.
Straining towards the forbidding dark barrier at the gap, our closer vision decomposed it into a sudden moving turbulence, as if mighty fish were distantly shoaling in the Doris. The wall seemed to dart and strike us. Here the paddles felt new forces that made them kick in our grip, as if hands in the water had seized to wrestle them from us. We were now in a moving group of whirlpools, and the noise was a hissing thunder. On the other side of our hulls of cloth and slats, the sea gathered below our thighs, like a horse bunching for the gallop. Only the breaking bits can push you over. Feel it starting to push you around a wee bit. Turn it right round, then go in point first if you can. Nice and slow. Keep your hands just a wee bit wider. Punch into it, Michael, lean forward, give it a bit of welly. Head towards the front of the boat. Keep heading out to sea. This way. Yoo-hoo! Well done.
That was phenomenal. Okay, I may have been a bit rough around the edges, but I've managed to survive my first real test of rough water. So from now on, I'm going to call myself a canoe boy. And like me, what the original Canoe Boys Alistair and Seamus lacked in experience, they more than made up for in enthusiasm. But they didn't undertake their trip just for the adrenaline rush of pushing themselves to the limit and beyond. Even today there are links to that bygone age, and one of them is Alistair's son, Ninian Dunnett.
They were certainly looking for adventure, but it was a particular sort of adventure they wanted. Alistair and Seamus had taken a scunner to the very English idea of adventure being something that meant hijinks in the jungles of colonial India or escapades on the rugged fields of Eton. And they knew there was an alternative because the two of them had been among that first generation of working class Scots in the 1930s who'd made their escape out into the Highlands, who'd come from particularly industrial Glasgow and taken the bus and hitchhiked and made their way out to the hills and found a land of adventure on their doorstep.
In later life, Alistair Dunnett and Seamus Adam would become well-known Scottish journalists. At the time of this trip, they were merely starting out in their careers though. So what better way to have financed their journey than by writing about it and the people that they met on the way? What they couldn't have predicted though was how their expedition captivated the whole nation and turned them into celebrities.
They had a little floating press office and they were sending dispatches back from wherever they landed to newspapers that had an appetite for it. This is Alistair's original scrapbook from the trip. It's not bound in leather, as you can see. Here are all the headlines that the press were eager to make use of. Canoeists battle with a gale, canoeists in rough seas. And of course, they were writing these things themselves, probably with some hilarity. And they were told by people who thought they were experts that what they were doing was sheer folly. It's too late in the year was the thing that rang, the phrase that came out most commonly. But the truth of it is, of course, that the time of year was the least of their problems. Apart from youth and fitness and an absolute will to achieve what they set out to do, they were very close to being literally out of their depth.
And I now know exactly what that feels like. But we're entering calmer waters and our next stop is the busy port of Oban. When Alistair and Seamus came here, arriving by kayak was unknown. Those pioneers could never have foreseen the massive difference between their three-part Lochaber canoes and today's highly sophisticated models.
On these boats, they've got this drop-down skeg at the back. And so I remember people really struggling to try and keep the boat going in a straight line. And then the hatches are completely waterproof. And they've just added a new one, this one on the foredeck here. For a while, the cockpits went really small, and now they've gone a lot bigger. And part of it so that you can climb in and out really easily. But also it's the clothing. Nowadays, it's pretty much a dry sport.
So when you think about the kit and the gear that the Canoe Boys were using to make their journey, just nobody would dream of doing something like that nowadays, would they?
No. Sitting 6 inches of water all Yeah, the whole time.
I guess they didn't even have sponges. They would have a little
They
bailing bucket.
maybe had a little bit of cloth or something.
Oh, yeah, bailing bucket or something.
They definitely had bailers here.
Yeah, but no, it's, and some of the boats even have a little electric pump.
Yes.
That comes on automatically, so it just keeps the boat really dry.
Next they're going to have wee paddles at the side that have got wee buttons as well, and you just sit back and on you go.
And the average age of people who are taking it up isn't young. It's quite a bit older than you.
And I hear there are people giving up football and taking it.
After 25 miles, I'm not quite the novice I was, but I'm definitely still on a very steep learning curve. And here comes another stiff test, my first big open water crossing. It's 9 miles to Stewart Castle over on Mull. I'm feeling every bit the adventurer, even a bit cocky, and I almost know which end of the boat is which.
Let's spin round, Michael, so we can get the front facing.
Okay. First there's a quick paddle to the island of Kerala. But there's one thing we can't control, and that's the weather. However gung-ho I may be, Brian with his years of experience knows this crossing demands respect.
So are you all set for this, Michael?
Aye. It's a really good feeling, a real sense of a bit of excitement and a genuine adventure.
Proper crossing.
Yeah, proper crossing. You know, you're at Oban, you're walking down the beach onto the waterfront and putting the boats in. It's a genuine excitement and I'm really looking forward to it.
That's going to be good.
You know, obviously it's a bit overcast now, hopefully going to clear up. What do you think when we get round the back of Kerala? What's your thoughts about the weather?
Well, I think it is going to clear up, but what I'm worried about most is the wind forecast, which is for picking up as the day goes on.
Yeah.
So we need to be able to judge whether our crossing is short enough to be able to get there before it changes significantly, and I think maybe we'll get away with it.
You're confident enough that I can navigate my way across?
I've no doubts about you, it's the wind I'm worried about.
I can't control that, unfortunately.
No. So we'll cross as far as the north end of Kerala to start with.
Yeah.
Give us a wee place to have a rest, sort things out, and just look ahead to Mull and decide if it's doable just now or whether it requires waiting for a wee while.
Yeah.
And hopefully we just crack on and get the turn of the tide, take us up the Sound of Mull.
I suppose there's always an element of you've just got to suck it and see.
I know.
You know, as much as you look from Kerala, there's an element of you've just got to get out there.
Yeah.
And then you'll get a fair idea whether we need to turn back or what.
Yeah, and not be frightened to turn back if that's the decision. That's what we'll do.
Getting to Kerala is the easy part. Now we must decide if we can do the big stretch to Mull in these conditions. To my mind, it doesn't look that bad or that far across, but I think we've established how much I know.
I think from quite early on you realise that what you're looking at isn't the whole picture. You know, so sometimes it looks like, well, it's not far from here to Mull. You can see it perfectly clearly. Half an hour later you might not see it anymore, and you've got to know what else is happening with the tide and the wind. And we know today the wind might kick up quite badly. So we don't want to get into a position where we're caught out with that. We want to be sure that if it does, it's taking us in the right direction. And it's not going to meet the wrong kind of tide coming out of the Sound of Mull. You just line all these things up. You line up the tide, you know what the wind's doing, and then no matter what happens really, you're not going to get very far wrong.
For me, I think that sometimes with the experience, it almost stops you from doing certain things in a negative way as well. You know, innocence of youth, and sometimes I look at youngsters that come through, they rush in, and it's amazing how they can pick up great performances or results, whereas with experience you look at situations in a different way and it almost hinders you at times.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, that phase of being young and indestructible and going for things almost in a spirit of ignorance,
Yeah.
but kind of enthusiasm and positivity, that can carry you through an awful lot. And if you survive the situations you're in, you actually learn a lot, which feeds into how you make decisions later on.
Compared with Brian's major expeditions round the Scottish coast and his circumnavigation of Ireland, this is a relatively short journey. But for me, I've already got that feeling of being completely removed from my normal life. And I'm discovering that there's more to this trip than simply paddling. And I suspect Brian is too.
You do get into that mode where the things that are important are the really basic things like weather and tides. and chocolate. But you know, you can very easily leave behind the stuff that diverts you all the time. You could leave behind GPS and phones and things if you choose to, and within a couple of days be completely away from all of those other cluttered things that mess up your head, and be reduced to a very simple way of living, which is quite hard to give up again once you've had a couple of weeks of living like that.
Was there times, surely, when you were doing your big trips that you had bouts of loneliness?
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, there were some times when I was very lonely and very worried and had nobody to speak to about how we would tackle certain headlands and so on, and that's not great, but those times are quite short, and they're mixed up with long periods of what you wouldn't really call loneliness, just solitude, just peaceful solitude. And the great thing about travelling on your own is it is even more of that same feeling of independence. It's kind of more concentrated.
The Scottish trip was such a turning point in my life. It just kind of formed me a wee bit, just the way I am about things. Just came at the right time, and it was scary enough and new enough and all that sort of thing.
Reminiscing's all very well, but it won't get us to Mull. This is a very busy stretch of water that will need my total concentration if I'm going to avoid an embarrassing accident.
I think we're going to go right through the middle of a sailing race.
There's quite a few of them coming around there, isn't there?
Seems quite an assortment of different sizes of boats and things, if it is a race.
Is this the big Calmac coming through?
Yep.
There's a Calmac behind Brian.
Right.
Oh, we're going to be the meat and the sandwich here.
Well, these two Calmacs are trying to avoid each other.
So what are we going to do? We're going to be stuck in the middle.
Yeah, stick close together though, so it's easy for them.
This will be a wee bit of swell.
There'll be a wash off this, yeah. And if they pass each other at the same time, there'll be a big wash off both of them. That's one thing though, the Calmac boats in this area are so used to small craft, sailors and yachts and dinghies and whatever. Kayakers too, I suppose.
It's great as well, seeing all the other boats and then seeing the Calmac ferry.
It's all happening. It's a busy bit of water.
This is absolutely stunning.
Fantastic, isn't it?
First time I've been to Oban, brilliant. First time I've been to Mull, kayaked over.
And not just a kayak, but an 80-year-old replica, a bit of plywood with a hole in it.
You know, this sort of thing, it's not the physical being able to do it, it's the mental thing of, can I keep paddling for however long?
It's also just getting the chance to do something like this.
Well, totally.
I mean, this is quite a unique little opportunity.
Absolutely. It's about going out there and doing it. I mean, I wouldn't ever know whether I was able to do this until you go and do it.
Getting a bit of life in the water at last. Can you see the tide race out there? Extending out from the island there. It's just a run of white caps you can see on the...
Yeah, I can see it, yeah.
Basically it's just a rock shelf. Where deep water hits shallow water it breaks, the same as what you get on a beach. But it's not just breaking, the tide's actually pushing on past that. Just keep a wee bit of power up and just blast through it. It won't feel as choppy as what we were in yesterday.
Oh! Ho, ho.
Is that a wobble?
Yeah. A wee wobble.
There's nothing blocking the swell coming through. We're completely open now to the south. And the wind's picking up a little bit. Keep your paddling quite wide on the wobbly side. That's good, Michael. Nice one. Keep it going.
It's so difficult to tell where it's coming from.
It's fairly speeded us up there.
Can't believe how far past that point. It's miles back now.
I know.
When you get a little bit of action like that, all of a sudden half an hour disappears.
And there's the castle just here. And if your energy's flagging, you usually find at the end of that you're ready to go another couple of hours.
Yeah, it pumps the adrenaline. That was brilliant.
But these boats are handling really well in that stuff. They're staying really high. I took a couple of waves on board, but not much.
Yeah, I took a couple of things. That was it.
Whew, we made it.
Arriving on the Isle of Mull for the first time, just round the back of Stewart Castle. No bad.
So the original journey,
the Canoe Boys were in that same tide race in that same area and lost a couple of hours because they were going against the tide.
Is that right?
Or didn't have the help of it.
Uh-huh.
And you can imagine how that would be to try and go against
I had to go against it.
It puts a lot of people off doing that crossing, or they'll time it so that they avoid the tide race completely. He did it like it was just natural.
If ignorance is bliss and lack of experience definitely works in favour. For me, you know, thinking about that, if you had, you know, sat over there and went, right, there's a potential we're going to hit a tide race and this is going to happen and that's going to happen, it's like planting seeds in your head. Just seeing it, and then you were so calm and you just said, right, look Michael, aim for it, paddle hard, no problem.
That may have been as good as any goal I've scored, or even as good as playing for Scotland. I'm like a wee kid in a sweet shop, and there's plenty more sweets to be had on this journey. From Stewart Castle we head up the Sound of Mull. Then there's more open water, first to Ardnamurchan, then Eigg and on to Eigg. Our final paddle will take us up the Sound of Slate to Skye. But our next stop is the capital of Mull, Tobermory. And when Alistair and Seamus arrived here, they got a tremendous welcome. One of those cheering them on was a wee lad called Duncan McGilp. Now he's almost 90, and nothing could stop him from coming to meet us in our boats.
Yes. So you do recognise them?
Oh yes, I recognise the construction as soon as I came around the pond.
And when you look at these boats, do they look quite a good reconstruction?
I would say that.
Quite similar?
They were splendid. I was very impressed by them.
Was that the first time something like this was seen here?
Oh yes, yes, there was great excitement among our age and great anxiety among our parents' age in case we attempted to go out in them.
To go too far.
And I remember my mother and several other adults down on the old pier, they came ashore there, down to shake them by the hand and tell them, be very foolhardy, I'm glad you're not your mother.
What age were you at the time they came through?
I would just be 8 then. And we were all out, including my father. And he was the provost of the town. This was his council came out to see how the boss was faring in the canoe. He managed very well.
And did people think they would get all the way to the Hebrides?
No.
No, they thought
they were very surprised that they managed to get
as far as this. Yes.
Especially on that day, it was a very wild day.
When the original Canoe Boys came this way, they encouraged the local people to try out their boats. It's a lifetime ago since Duncan McGilp last sat in one of these Lochaber canoes, and he's keen to get in it again.
Stand here?
Yes, right in the middle is best. Nicely done.
Quite long. They're homemade too. Very good.
Back in 1934, Duncan and the other Tobermory kids were captivated by these boats. Their parents were more cautious. Many of them said the Canoe Boys had left it too late in the year for such an ambitious journey. So with a tight schedule to keep, it's time for us to move on and paddle up to the northwest of Mull. We've had favourable conditions, but back when Alistair and Seamus did this, they struggled up this coastline as they battled against strong winds and pounding seas.
You just have to step in and lift the boats up carefully.
They had actually wanted to go straight over to Ardnamurchan Point, but were driven back to Mull, so had to camp overnight in an abandoned croft at Ardmore. We've retraced their steps.
I wonder how far this cottage is from here that Alistair was talking about in the book.
And it is just like a crofter's cottage.
Yeah, quite a well-built stone place, but I don't suppose there's much of it left. 80 years on.
Yeah, it's a fair amount of time. It'll be actually quite interesting to see what is left of it.
There's an awful lot of forestry and plantations being put in here since that time. Be surprised if there's much left. Just a few walls, maybe.
So this looks like this could be...
This is the top of the gable here. It might be the one we're looking for.
The bothy here.
Ardmore.
It's certainly going to be up high to get a good view across the Ardnamurchan.
And there must be a pretty good view from there.
Yeah, there's
Well,
the
the other
chimney
gable
stack.
chimney on it. Yeah, no roof, all gone.
You lead on, you're going to slip.
Probably.
You do it first.
Well, catch me. Well, it's seen better days, but this is
Yep.
a good solid place, isn't it?
Yeah, as you said, it's a very, very sturdy structure, but
Been quite a big place in its day.
I can imagine it would have been a great welcome spot for them to hunker down and wait for a better crossing.
Yeah, it already feels more sheltered.
Because by all accounts, their trip round from Tobermory to here was a bit of a task, a difficult one.
Yeah, they'd have been exhausted and wet and
Aye.
ready for a fire. Well, let's have a look at the book and see if we can recognise the fireplace that they were sitting by.
They would have been able to look out and get a bit of a feeling for how the crossing would be.
Yeah, since this is higher ground, they'll have been able to see more of the sea ahead and see what sort of swell they were heading into.
Our next stage would be the most dangerous open water passage of the trip, round Ardnamurchan, the furthest west point on the British mainland, a buttress of rock hammered endlessly by the Atlantic, and without a shore for miles. The account of this hazard makes disturbing reading in all the navigational journals, and even the most optimistic of our Tobermory friends could not desist from a repeated warning: it's too late in the year for Ardnamurchan.
It's just a very committing place to go around. There's not a lot of options for coming ashore as you're heading down Ardnamurchan until you're actually past the points that are difficult. And then there are a couple of good beaches where we can head in for shelter and a rest at the end of that.
For you, such an experienced man of the water, we're using these boats that are very different to modern day kayaks. Will it be different for you, or will you just carry on regardless and calm, cool and collected like you normally are?
No, we will. We'll blunder along calm, cool and maybe a wee bit ignorant. But these boats are very different in the sense that they can take on a lot more water. We're not as sealed in as they would be in a modern kayak with fairly waterproof below decks, which means that if we were to capsize, it's going to fill up with water and it's going to take a lot of work to bail them out and get them back to floating and seaworthy again. You don't really have that worry in a modern sea kayak, which can be tipped over and rolled back upright. We don't have that luxury. We've got to try and stay afloat.
Today we've timed things perfectly. It's raining, but the swell isn't a problem. We're making good progress, we've not taken in too much water, and I'm certainly not planning on capsizing anytime soon.
So do we think that this headland here is the furthest west?
No, not quite. I think it slopes out to the west a bit from here. The headland at the end of the straight bit, it's only a tiny one, but it's further west than Ardnamurchan.
So the lighthouse is tucked round the back of the furthest west point?
Well, it's on the next headland, which is higher, but less west.
There's the lighthouse.
That's quite something, isn't it? It's really unusual to be able to get so close in here.
Is that right?
It's usually chaos right for half a mile out. Really good conditions. I don't think I've ever been in this close before. I really like kayak travel really for being close to the shore and seeing things. A means of travel rather than trying to do new stuff. Stop off when you want, meet people. It's really flexible for that. Go to uninhabited places or habited places and you choose. Used to come into little harbours in the west of Ireland where I knew they would be inhabited, you know, when there'd be people fishing off the pier and everything. You could have a great time, you know, just meeting people and chatting. You'd sometimes come close to shore and you knew they'd be watching you because something unusual arriving out of the sea. And sort of make a big show of being exhausted. Listen to us delay. And testing the wind and checking your compass and everything. And then just flop on the shore and then come down and say, are you okay? Are you all right? Just say, hey buddy, is this Ireland? And we'd go, ah, it is, you've made it. You sure it's Ireland? It is, really honest. Before you knew it, there's a whole heap of people giving you a place to sleep for the night. And the best thing is with the Irish, once they realise you've been having them on, they love it.
Aye, they love it, aye.
Brilliant.
I'd love to stop and actually stand on the furthest west point.
Just to say you'd done it.
Aye.
It's rocky though. It's enough to paddle around it. Anyway, it's on film. You can prove you've been here.
Just coming round the headland there and past the lighthouse is tremendous. I mean, again, we've said it many times throughout the journey that some parts we've had great weather, other times it's been dreich like this, but it all adds to the experience. And once you've got the kit on and you're warm, it doesn't really matter, does it?
No. Keeping going, keeping the heat going, and just keeping moving. Just being able to see these places is fantastic. It's always amazing to want to know what's round the next corner, and you don't get a bigger sort of corner to look round than Ardnamurchan Point. It sticks so far west that you just want to see what's on the far side of it. And the great thing about the kayak is that you can look in front of where you're travelling, you know, which is not like rowing, where you're travelling backwards and only seeing what's disappearing behind you.
Yeah.
And that's a point that the Canoe Boys did bring out, because to them this was quite a new form of travel. They were used to rowing, but they weren't used to kayaking, so suddenly they were able to, you know, use
Turn
this
180
motion
degrees.
and go forward and see where they were heading.
Once again, I'm venturing into parts of Scotland that are new to me. This journey has exceeded all my expectations. There's been great scenery, fantastic company, and genuine exploration. It's as good as kicking a ball around, and that's for sure. But that's all about to change. We're on our way over to Eigg, one of the small isles, and I'm starting to feel awful. I have no energy and my stomach is churning. The signs are definitely not good. I've had enough. I'm sick a couple of times.
Yeah.
I can't eat. I was trying to splash it off.
Reach it with that.
Cheers.
Lentil soup. Does it feel any better now it's up? Or?
A wee bit. I just. Right, let's go.
Get it over with.
Predictably, things go from bad to worse. Finally, and perhaps equally predictably, I snap.
Got my chin.
Oh, your thumb's bleeding. Is it your chin?
My chin.
Oh, quite deep actually. Did that just happen out of no extra push?
No, it was me pushing it. I was putting like a big one right into the water.
It still shouldn't happen.
Skimmed right off it. Temper taking a big swipe into the water. The blade didn't catch it. It was bounced up, snapped and smacked my chin.
It's a good chunk out. Must have been one of these big splinters that stuck in there.
Gonna need stitches.
I suppose if it was bleeding a lot you might, but it looks like there's a gouge out.
It's as bad as it gets. One canoe, no paddle and a damaged chin. And I'm left with a sneaky suspicion it wasn't Brian just being well prepared that made him bring a spare paddle aboard our safety boat.
Okay, we'll see you there, thanks very much.
Not exactly an enjoyable crossing. I'll be glad to get out and get onto dry land. Luckily, we're only a couple of miles from Eigg, and the rhythm of paddling should help to calm me down. But I know this is one piece of film, unfortunately, I am not going to be allowed to forget. And it's not just my pride that's been dented. It's been confirmed my chin definitely needs attended to. So it's just as well the doctor's visiting the island today. Special service. Shows you what a good community they've got here. The doctor's waiting on hand. Obviously knew I was turning up. We're jumping in the way. A few stitches and a bit of glue later and I'm all good to go. The great thing about this journey is that even though the day began badly, it ends much better. We've landed on the northernmost part of Eigg, on the very spot chosen by the original Canoe Boys. It's a perfect evening and I'm still amazed at how fortunate I've been.
Couldn't have timed it any better.
No.
You know, the doctor's here on Eigg.
About to leave us.
Yeah, about to leave, aye. So it was very fortunate that you know, the timing that we got here.
To get injured and come into Eigg on the very day the doctor is here, when the doctor's only here every 7 days.
Yeah.
We could have passed by another 10 minutes and missed him completely. Very nice. You can see where the paddle's stuck in the bottom of there.
Aye, so it wasn't overly sore, it was just more annoying.
And bleeding all over the boat.
I was bleeding, aye. But I was just more annoyed with myself.
And we've had 2 days doing what most people consider very hard. Ardnamurchan Point, Dorismore, and you know, you managed great. They weren't really too hard in the grand scheme of things, and yet today, which should have been a relatively straightforward crossing, threw up a lot of problems. But you can't predict how a day's going to start and end.
When I went up to see the doctor, it's like you start to appreciate what an absolute mammoth task what these boys were doing.
As well as being damp all the time, everything's salty so it doesn't dry anyway unless you wash it in fresh water, and that then is hard and brittle, chafes against your skin. You're sitting all day in wet stuff, so you get kind of the equivalent of bed sores all the time because you're in pressure and wetness.
You start to appreciate how tough the task is.
Yeah, well, they were young guys, you know, they were still quite resilient and not rheumatic and cranky. And
I'd like to think I'm still young. I'm certainly cranky,
so
that's the problem.
Anyway, we made it.
Yeah.
Cheers.
Cheers. Slash.
And I'll say aye to that. It's a fantastic spot we've found for the night, and there's just one job remaining. Our predecessors lived as cheaply as possible. Almost every meal was a concoction of oatmeal, salt, water and butter. They called it oatmeal bros, and it almost cooks itself, a process they affectionately called gloating. We wanted to see how this worked in practice.
Dinner time.
Dinner time. We're going to have some oatmeal bros, which looks decidedly like some porridge, but by all accounts they say once you have a good portion of this done properly, you'll always want this. Keep going, keep splashing it on. Let's cover it up and...
What do we do now?
We gloat and look out rum and slate.
How long does gloating take?
Oh, well, I think it maybe takes another one, doesn't it?
I reckon so.
Slash. I think there's worse places to wait for 4 or 5 minutes. Campfire, great view, hear the waterfall in the background.
That's my stomach rumbling. Throw a bit of butter in this.
Yes, the sauce. Watch my fingers. Watch my fingers.
Stir violently.
No wonder, look at the size of it. Once we get the butter going, we put the...
That's the secret ingredient. Stir violently.
You want to have a violent shot at it?
I think we need to have a
You have a violent shot at it.
It's hard to be violent with a plastic fork, isn't it?
I think it's probably about time that we did some more
gloating.
Yeah, lunch.
Cheers.
There we go.
Thank you. Looks lumpy. Actually, that's alright, isn't it?
Not bad at all.
Apparently this is the combination, this is the recipe that helped the Scots defeat the Romans and the Vikings and anybody else
that cared to have a go.
Cared to have a go so far.
We're now more than 2/3 of the way through our journey up Scotland's west coast. It's been totally absorbing and sometimes quite hazardous, and that sense of jeopardy and an uncertain outcome can be fun, especially when you're safe afterwards.
It is very hard to recreate the feeling of being properly, not in danger, but on the edge. And if you do, by deliberately leaving behind the trappings of safety, you're kind of looked at as being a little bit irresponsible for doing that.
I suppose that's what all adventurers were doing in one way or another throughout the years, and I'm pretty sure that Seamus and Alistair were thought like that in a number of places that they came into, that they were a little bit irresponsible and crazy to be trying what they were trying.
They were, exactly, and you know, the whole thing about when they met people and asked for advice about what they were doing, even if people realised the boats were quite capable,
yeah,
they were constantly being told, it's the wrong time of year, it's too late in the year to do this.
We're now approaching the fishing village of Mull, and after the last few days, it feels like a metropolis. Seamus and Alistair stayed here for nearly 3 weeks, repairing their boats, writing up their experiences and getting to know the locals. We might not have that luxury, but there is one person we must meet. Seamus's daughter Ailish, who lives in Wales, has come all the way up here to see these Loch Aber canoes for the first time.
Dad would have loved to have been here to see this, he really would. So would Alistair, they'd have been thrilled, the pair of them. The canoes are much smaller than I expected. With the picture of the canoes, they seem to be an awful lot longer than that, because they were in 3 bits. They had the bit at the front and the same amount at the back, and then the cockpit where they were sitting. Maybe when I see them side on, they might be as big, but they don't look it. Hello? How have you got on?
Not too bad.
Good.
You had a nice journey?
Yes, thank you. Lovely. Bit drier than yours, no doubt.
I think so.
Have you enjoyed it?
Yeah, I'm loving it.
Good.
Oh, Brian. Hi, good to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Never used anything like this before. But they're fantastic wee boats.
Really?
Really capable little boats, yeah. A bit wet.
Yes.
A lot of water in.
Yes.
But they go fairly well.
I never saw the canoe.
It wasn't lying about the house or in the garden?
No, I don't know what happened to them at the end of the trips. I really don't know, but I never saw them. The canoe we had was a much smaller version than this.
Really?
A little white thing.
That you had as a family?
Child.
It's been years since Ailish has been in a canoe, but that doesn't matter. There is no holding her back as she wants to get out and try the boat that changed her dad's life.
I haven't canoed since I was 10 or 11. But I reckon I can still do it. If I take them off, then they won't get wet. I don't think I have ever canoed in a life jacket before. So that's going to make it a bit different.
There's a handle just there.
Thank you.
There we go.
Excellent.
Right, here we go.
Thank you.
There we go.
See if I can catch up with her. I'm right behind you.
Okay, where do you want me to go?
Straight ahead. How does it feel?
Lovely.
Even today, these splendid boats attract a lot of interest.
I was looking out the window and thought, I've seen that shape of canoe before. These are the ones from the Canoe Boys, but there aren't any in existence anymore, so came charging down the stairs, nearly broke my neck. They look exactly like the photographs in the book. And of course there's the drawing in the book as well, which gives you all the proportions. They look absolutely spot on.
If they were in open sea and it was rough, it must have been quite scary.
I was surprised at how well they scoot along. It's quite amazing. They look like they would not go very fast at all, but they seem to handle very nicely.
Lovely. I enjoyed it. As I say, I'm very surprised at the size of it. That was great fun.
There's just one final leg of our journey left. Up the Sound of Slate, through Kyle Ray and finishing under the Skye Bridge at Kyleakin. At Kyle Ray the current can be fierce, but today the tide's with us, so Brian plans to finish our journey in style.
There we go. It's like the waltzers. Right, we need a rudder on that side. You take the brolly, I'll rudder this side. Paddle on the deck.
Oh, aye. That was smoothly done. Eh? You take the brolly.
Put that forward a wee bit and up higher. It's just catching a wee bit more wind.
Keep it low, tilt it forward a wee bit.
That's it. And off we go.
Come on, Mary Poppins.
Brian's showing his experience. He was like very quickly handed the umbrella over to me, and I was like, that's not awful easy. I'll just get the other end and steer, and you hold the brolly. That was great. I could imagine getting over to Stornoway if I had that assistance all the way.
Yeah, we had everything going with us. Wind, brolly, tide, everything.
I'm thinking we should be able to see the Skye Bridge round this.
I think so too, yeah. Pretty sure of it. Depends if there's another... Oh, look at the seal away on the water.
Oh, aye. Brilliant.
There she goes.
Uh-huh.
Little head.
We're pretty close to it.
Yeah.
It'd be nice if it was a dolphin. Just to...
To finish the trip.
There's a certain sense of achievement pulling in here. Got to say for myself.
Not half. Well, we're still floating, still in...
That's the
still in one piece.
That's the achievement.
Still talking to each other.
Just about.
Don't hit a rock.
Aye. Come a cropper. Just a few more paddle strokes and we'll be there. And waiting on the shore are our boat builders, Martin Hughes and the apprentices Connor Campbell and Ben McColgan. Making these replica canoes was a labour of love for them, and these Lochabbers have passed every test. They've come through practically unscathed. Hello there! It's always nice to...
Ground, well done, boys.
To get out. Even better when you've managed to get in one piece.
Yeah.
Not just ourselves, but the boats as well. Job well done, guys. Job well done.
Yes, thank you very much, and to yourself for actually rowing this far in them.
Aye. So, in all
I think the
seriousness...
boats speak for themselves, don't they?
Well done, guys.
Thank you very much.
Excellent.
Well done to you both. Completing the journey and surviving.
Yeah, it's been great fun.
They're really good looking boats as well. I mean, listen, I'm not, I've not got any real sort of marine background, but again, Brian's a big fan of them, and you'd be surprised the amount of folk that have come up and pass comment and know all about them as well.
I can see the kind of the fun and the joy of just going out there without a care in the world and just adventuring, really. So.
And you could do it from start to finish. You could make the thing, get in it, and go.
It looks like great fun, and it's a few weeks away. Rowing on, get on the canoe, that'd be great.
So that's the end of this particular trip, but it could be the start of something new for Connor and Ben. And in the true spirit of the Canoe Boys, it's time for them to have a go in these beautiful boats that they made for our journey. And what a journey it's been. I've negotiated the whirlpools of the Doris Moor, the tidal race on my crossing to Mull. I've successfully kayaked round Ardnamurchan Point and been a little less successful in a confrontation with a paddle. And what became of the original Canoe Boys? Alistair Dunnett realised his journalistic ambitions and went on to become editor of the Daily Record and Scotsman. He was knighted for services to journalism and public life in Scotland. Seamus Adam also prospered. He became a notable author, broadcaster and poet, and he was someone who promoted Scotland around the world. As for Brian and I, well, we're already planning for our next adventure.